This year is the 50th anniversary of the death of the great French organist Marcel Dupré, and this week we are uploading a new video performance of Dupré's masterpiece, Le Chemin de la Croix. A more thoughtful interpretation, I hope, than the rather anxious recording that I recorded on my own in the church last year in the early days of the big lockdown. The 14 stations will be divided into 5 daily instalments, and I thought it might be helpful to add this introduction explaining what Dupré is trying to do, drawing attention to the important leitmotifs, the symbolic recurring themes that he uses throughout the whole work. I did try doing it at church, but the logistics there are quite complicated. It's difficult to speak from the organ bench and to play at the same time. So I've come home and I'm going to do it here. The first performance of Le Chemin de la Croix in 1931 was accompanied by a sequence of 14 poetic reflections on the Stations of the Cross, Le Chemin de la Croix by the French Catholic poet Paul Claudel. Modern performances often include a recitation of these poems. Well, I say poems, they're partly poems, partly prayers. Claudel offers an individual, challenging, thought-provoking interpretation of each scene, and some of it's very beautiful. But like so much French poetry, a lot of it is simply untranslatable. And to my ears, it just doesn't sound right in English. So I will be including some quotations from Claudel here, but that's all. In the first group of 3 stations, Jesus is condemned to death, he receives the burden of the cross, and he falls for the first time as he embarks on the painful journey to Calvary. In the opening trial scene, Dupré uses musical motifs to convey the rhythm of spoken words, but in French, of course. He begins with this pregnant phrase, which always puzzled me until I came across his own programme notes, in which he says that they represent the words of Pilate. Garde, saisissez-vous de cet homme. Guards, arrest this man. After this, chaos breaks out in the courtroom and we hear the crowd crying, Jésus, Jésus. And Barabbas, but in French with the accent on the first syllable, which is Barabbas. And let him be crucified, qu'il soit crucifié. And then à mort, to death. Ending with this enormous chord, à mort. Then the crowd disperses and fades away into the distance. Look, O Christian, says Claudel, and tremble. Ah, that solemn moment when Christ first accepts the burden of the eternal cross. How long it is, how hard, how rigid, how heavy, the weight of the useless sinner. The music of the second station is quite discordant, and it doesn't make for comfortable listening, really. Against an oppressive snapped rhythm, da-da, 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 da-da. We hear the first of Dupré's symbolic themes, the theme of the cross, which consists of rising fourths, which he had also found, he said, in the Passion music of Bach and Handel to symbolise the cross. So it goes like this. But later on in some of the other pieces, he uses it also the other way around. But here we have the rising form. Just give a little idea. So this da-da rhythm goes the whole way through. Bum, bum. and so on. And so we come on to number 3, Jesus falls for the first time. In motion, says Claudel, victim and hangman march together towards Calvary. God, pulled by the neck, suddenly stumbles and falls to the ground. So, Lord, what do you think of this first fall? The moment when you fall and the badly loaded burden flings you down. How do you find this earth that you made? Ah, it is not just the path of the good that is rough. The way of evil, too, is treacherous and steep. So after the discordant harmonies of the first piece, Dupré gives us now a powerful march in the traditional tragic key of G minor. It starts quietly like this, and you'll hear the pairs of descending notes that represent weary footsteps, and they continue the whole way through the piece. Here they come. And then we hear the second of the important symbolic themes, the theme that Dupré calls la souffrance, the theme of suffering, and it's combined with the footsteps. That's an important one to remember because we'll hear it a lot later on. The march builds up to an enormous climax, and now the footsteps are played by both feet together. And after that, it gradually fades away. And then at the end, we have a distant glimmer of hope. A third symbolic theme, it's just 4 rising notes like this. And Dupré calls it the theme of redemption. We'll hear that one later on as well. So the next 3 stations form a kind of interlude in which Jesus encounters 3 people on the road. His mother, Simon the Cyrenian, who helps him to carry the cross, and Veronica, who comes out of the crowd to wipe his face. In number 4, Jesus meets his afflicted mother. Mary stands by the road, frozen with horror, says Dupré. Down her face flow silent tears. Mary's theme is a very simple phrase on a beautiful solo flute. Just 3 notes like this, with a long one to start with. In the background, like a kind of lullaby, soft harmonies circle and drift aimlessly from one key to another, underneath her faltering lament. We'll hear some of this music again at the end of the 13th station, when Mary is reunited with the body of her son at the foot of the cross. And so in the 5th station, a stranger, Simon the Cyrenian, is pulled out of the crowd to help Jesus carry the cross. You might think, how on earth do you illustrate that in a piece of music? But Dupré comes up with a rather lovely solution. We have a gentle background of a kind of impressionistic walking music. And then we hear the theme of the cross representing Jesus. It's going down this time. Then Simon appears and the theme turns into a duet between the right hand and the pedal, but he can't keep in step and he can't get the notes quite right. But eventually he finds the right notes and the right rhythm, the two voices become one, and the burden of the cross is eased. And so, number 6, Jesus and Veronica, or in French, une femme pieuse essuie la face de Jésus. A pious woman wipes the face of Jesus. All the disciples have fled, says Claudel. Peter himself denies with passion, but a woman throws herself into the confusion. She finds Jesus and takes his face in her hands. Veronica's song of compassion, says Dupré, sings out in a harmonious, archaic and slightly exotic atmosphere. He uses this little dee-dee-dee, da-da-da, dee-dee-dee, a little bit oriental. And then in the bass we hear the theme of the cross again. And then at the end, those 4 rising notes of the theme of redemption. But with different harmonies this time. And so, with the next 3 stations, the drama intensifies as Jesus falls for the 2nd and 3rd times under the weight of the cross. It is not the stone underfoot, says Claudel, nor the halter drawn too tight. It is the soul that suddenly fails, because the road is long and the end is far, because you are all alone and there is no consolation. The bitter ascent resumes, says Dupré, while the turbulent crowd presses on all sides round the tragic procession, and the 2nd fall passes almost unnoticed. If you remember the start of number 3, the 1st fall, the 2nd fall starts in the same way, but it's in a different key, a more complex sound, and the footsteps are still there, but this time they're quicker, more anxious, more confused. Again, this march builds up to a big climax and then fades into the distance. Before the horror of the 3rd fall, we have another moment of calm as Jesus has his 4th and last encounter on the road with the women of Jerusalem. In his 8th poem, Claudel addresses directly the image that we see on the wall of so many churches, including our own. Before he climbs the mountain for the last time, Jesus lifts his finger and turns to the people who accompany him, some poor weeping women with children in their arms. And we, let us not just watch, let us listen to Jesus, for he is here. It is not a man who lifts his finger in the middle of this humble painting. It is God who for our salvation has suffered, and not just on canvas. The holy women, says Dupré, follow sad unto death, haunted by the vision of the final sacrifice. The theme of their grief rises up like a lament to which the consoling voice of Jesus replies. The theme of the grief of the women of Jerusalem is important, as we'll hear it again in the final procession when the body of Jesus is taken to the tomb. It goes like this. With the dotted rhythm is easy to remember. And then Jesus replies with the theme of consolation. So if we put them together. And we'll hear that theme of consolation again just before Jesus dies on the cross. So we come to number 9. Jesus falls for the third time. The crowd, says Dupré, is infuriated by the slow progress of the ascent. Cries, clamours and insults break out on all sides. In this terrifying 9th station, the violence implicit in the 2 previous falls erupts in full fury. The footsteps motif comes back again, it's hammered out by both feet on the pedals, and the fall itself is sudden, graphic and violent. I'm not going to try and illustrate it on this little organ, it needs the big one. It is followed by a long silence before, in Dupré's own words, a few muffled spasms illustrate the crushing of the victim. I fell again, says Claudel, and this time it is the end. With the 10th station, we reach the hill of Calvary where Jesus will be crucified. Jesus is stripped of his garments. Again, you might think, how can you illustrate that in a piece of music? But this scene inspired from Dupré what for me is one of the most memorable pieces of them all. The music is not particularly loud, but it's very aggressive and it's kind of tragic at the same time. Impossible to describe. It just occurred to me this morning that what this music most reminds me of is a swarm of angry wasps. But that's just the first part of the piece. To go back to Claudel again for a moment, now they have taken his tunic and seamless robe, says Claudel, we lift our eyes and dare to look on the perfect purity of Jesus. In the second half of the piece, Dupré gives us what he calls a meditation on the mystery of the Incarnation, a mysterious procession of slow chords on a soft flute stop. And so we come to the gruesome 11th station. Jesus is nailed to the cross. The obsessive rhythm of the hammer blows, says Dupré, forcing the nails through the hands and feet of Jesus, dominates this station and expresses the implacable cruelty of the executioners, while at times there rises up the heart-rending cry of the theme of suffering. So we have the theme of the cross again on the pedals. It's going down now, representing the nails. And then later on top, we have La Souffrance, the theme of suffering. And so on. So, the 12th station, Jesus dies on the cross. Darkness has fallen over all the earth, and eerie, disembodied music floats out of the darkness. There are fragments of melody that suggest Jesus' 7 last words from the cross. And it's especially poignant that Dupré asks for them to be played on a stop called Voix Humaine, Vox Humana, which literally means the human voice. We hear again his theme of consolation with which he comforted the women of Jerusalem. Today you will be with me in paradise. The Gospels tell us that the earth trembled and Jesus cried out in a loud voice. So to symbolise his death, Dupré gives us an extraordinary earthquake, just a brief explosion of sound. It's all over in a few seconds, and then we're left alone in darkness and silence. So, to the 13th station, the body of Jesus is taken down from the cross and laid in Mary's bosom. This is the image immortalised by so many of the world's great artists in the form of a pietà. Dupré beautifully evokes the tenderness of the descent from the cross in a flowing, downward curving arabesque for soft flute stops, which goes like this. But he combines this with the theme of 4 rising notes we heard earlier, representing redemption. So if you put them together, and then when the body is brought down after a long silence, Mary is reunited with the body of her son, and we have just a reprise of a few bars of the music of the 4th station. Here the passion comes to an end, says Claudel, and the compassion continues. Christ is no longer on the cross, he is with Mary, who has received him. Christ, who has suffered in the view of all, is once more hidden in the bosom of his mother. In her arms, the church forever takes charge of her beloved. So to the final station, the body of Jesus is laid in the tomb. In this, the last and longest of the 14 stations, Dupré paints a beautiful musical picture of the solemn procession to the tomb, using the theme of the women of Jerusalem from the 8th station. And it sounds now like this. And he builds it up beautifully. And so on. And then, after a while, we hear the theme of suffering on top for the last time. And then the pedals initiate a kind of muffled drum beat. It creeps in almost unnoticed to start with. It continues for 2 pages while the funeral procession continues into the distance. eventually the drum fades away. Now how is Dupré going to end? We can't end there. Well, I can't resist here quoting just a few bars from a much better known piece of sacred music. This is the magical opening of the last movement of Maurice Dupré Requiem, the In Paradisum. That was written in 1947. Here, written in 1931 and transposed into the same key, is the last page of Le Chemin de la Croix. Yes, it's exactly the same chord. This beautiful chord that opens up from the bottom, budding like a beautiful opening flower, which is no reflection on Dupré, but you wouldn't change a note of his Requiem. But to be fair, Dupré got there first. Duré's theme is the Gregorian chant In Paradisum, may the angels lead you into paradise. But Dupré ends Le Chemin de la Croix with the theme of suffering, which we've heard so many times before, but now it's been magically transformed into a distant angel's song, a song of eternal life. And the whole work ends, you can hear the high pitch stops right up at the top of the keyboard with this unresolved chord. There's no bass note. At the end of Le Chemin de la Croix, Dupré leaves us up in a starry sky, awaiting the miracle of Easter morning.